In a small, sleepy town surrounded by rolling hills and endless fields, Harold Thompson lived a life as simple and steady as the ticking of an old clock. At 76 years old, Harold had seen his fair share of ups and downs. He was a retired mechanic who had spent most of his life fixing cars, trucks, and tractors for neighbors and strangers alike. His hands were rough from decades of work, but they still carried the same care and precision that made him beloved in the community. Widowed 10 years ago, Harold now lived alone in the cozy little house he'd shared with his late wife, Margaret. The garden out back was his pride and joy, rows of tomatoes, cucumbers, and sunflowers that seemed to stretch toward the sky. Every morning, without fail, Harold would wake up at dawn, brew himself a strong cup of coffee, and sit on the porch to watch the sunrise. It wasn't much, but it brought him peace. On weekends, he liked to visit the local diner where everyone knew his name. There, he'd swap stories with friends about the good old days or listen patiently as younger folks talked about their dreams and troubles. Harold wasn't one to gossip, but he enjoyed being part of the fabric of the town, a quiet cornerstone that people could always count on. One sunny afternoon, Harold decided to spend some time working on a vintage Chevy parked in his driveway. The car belonged to a friend's grandson who had begged Harold to restore it. Though he didn't need the money, Harold couldn't resist the challenge. As he leaned over the engine, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Looking up, he saw a shiny black sedan pulling into his driveway. Out stepped a man wearing what looked like a police uniform, dark pants, a crisp shirt, and a shiny badge clipped to his belt. His aviator sunglasses glinted in the sunlight as he approached Harold with long, confident strides. "Mr. Thompson?" the man asked, his voice firm but polite. Harold straightened up, brushing dirt off his jeans. "That's me," he replied, squinting against the bright light. Something about the stranger felt off. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, too stiff and rehearsed, like he was trying too hard to look official. Or maybe it was the fact that Harold couldn't remember ever seeing this man before, not at the diner, not around town, nowhere. The man introduced himself as Officer Daniels and flashed his badge again. "I'm investigating a string of burglaries in the area," he explained. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Harold hesitated for just a moment. Burglaries? In this town? It sounded strange, but then again, crime happened everywhere these days. Nodding slowly, Harold gestured for the man to follow him inside. The kitchen smelled faintly of yesterday's apple pie, and the table was cluttered with newspapers and tools. Harold cleared a space and motioned for the man to sit down. As they settled in, Officer Daniels began asking questions, lots of them. Some were harmless enough. Had Harold noticed anyone suspicious lately? Did he lock his doors at night? But others made Harold raise an eyebrow. Questions about his finances, his family, whether anyone visited him regularly. The tone shifted subtly, becoming more probing, almost demanding. When Harold gave vague answers or shrugged, the man's patience seemed to wear thin. His smile tightened, and his words carried a sharper edge. Still, Harold kept his cool. He'd learned long ago how to mask his unease, especially when dealing with pushy people. By the time the visit ended, Harold had agreed to nothing concrete. As the man left, handing him a business card with a curt nod, Harold stood on the porch and watched the sedan disappear down the road. Only then did he let himself exhale deeply. Something about the whole encounter gnawed at him, lingering like a shadow even after the sun had dipped below the horizon. After the strange visitor drove away, Harold stood on his porch for a while, staring at the empty driveway. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, but the warmth did little to ease the chill that had settled in his chest. He turned the business card over in his hand, studying it carefully. It looked official enough, a police emblem printed neatly in the corner, along with a name and phone number. But something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was the faint smudge on the ink, or the way the edges weren't perfectly cut, or maybe it was just the nagging feeling in his gut telling him this wasn't right. Harold walked back inside and placed the card on the kitchen table, where it sat like an uninvited guest. He poured himself another cup of coffee, sipping slowly as he replayed the conversation in his mind. The man's questions kept coming back to him. The ones about his savings account, his daughter's visits, and whether he ever received packages from out of town. Why would a real officer care so much about those things? And why had he seemed so interested in knowing if anyone checked up on Harold regularly? As the evening wore on, Harold found it hard to focus on anything else. He tried tinkering with the Chevy's engine again, but his hands fumbled more than usual, and the wrench slipped twice. Frustrated, he gave up and retreated to his favorite armchair by the window. Outside, the sky turned shades of orange and pink before fading into deep blue. Normally, Harold loved watching the sunset, but tonight his thoughts were too scattered to appreciate it. Finally, around 8 o'clock, Harold decided to call his daughter, Susan. She lived 2 hours away in a bustling city, but they spoke often, usually swapping stories about their days or talking about her kids. Picking up the phone, Harold hesitated for a moment. Should he even mention the visit? It might sound silly, and he didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. But then again, Susan always encouraged him to share anything unusual, no matter how small. "Hey, Dad." Susan answered cheerfully after the second ring. "What's up?" "Oh, not much," Harold replied, trying to sound casual. "Just thought I'd check in." They chatted briefly about her day, how work was going, what the grandkids were up to, and then Harold worked up the courage to bring up the stranger. "So, someone stopped by today. Said he was a police officer. Wanted to ask me some questions about burglaries in the area." Susan's tone shifted instantly. "A police officer? What kind of questions?" Haltingly, Harold recounted the entire encounter. The man's appearance, the odd line of questioning, the business card. As he spoke, Susan grew quieter, her voice taking on a sharper edge. When Harold finished, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "That doesn't sound right, Dad," she said finally. "Real officers don't usually show up unannounced asking personal stuff like that. Did he give you any ID besides the badge?" "Well, yeah, he showed me a badge," Harold replied. "And he left me this card." He picked it up off the table and glanced at it again. "Text me a picture of it," Susan instructed. "Right now." Harold obliged, snapping a quick photo with his phone and sending it over. While he waited for her response, he paced the living room, his unease growing with each passing minute. A few moments later, Susan called back, her voice tense. "Dad, I don't think this guy is legit," she said. "That phone number doesn't match any local law enforcement agency. Not even close." Harold froze mid-step. "You sure?" "I double-checked." Susan replied firmly. "This smells like trouble. Don't trust him, okay? If he comes back, don't let him inside." Her words sent a shiver down Harold's spine. For all his years of independence, Harold knew better than to ignore his daughter's instincts. Still, he couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and fear bubbling beneath the surface. Who was this man? And what did he want? Was Harold being targeted because of his age? Or was there something bigger going on? That night, sleep eluded Harold. Every creak of the old house made him glance toward the window, half expecting to see headlights pulling into the driveway again. Though he locked the doors and checked them twice, the sense of vulnerability lingered. For the first time in years, Harold felt truly alone and unsure of what might come next. The next morning, Harold woke up earlier than usual, his mind still racing with the events of the previous day. The business card sat on the kitchen counter, its presence looming larger than it should for such a small object. He stared at it while sipping his coffee, the steam rising in soft curls. Who was this Officer Daniels, and why had he chosen Harold? Was he part of something bigger? These questions swirled around in Harold's head like storm clouds refusing to clear. After breakfast, Harold decided to tidy up the house, hoping the routine task would distract him. But no matter how hard he tried to focus on sweeping the floors or organizing his tools, his thoughts kept drifting back to the suspicious visitor. It wasn't just the oddness of the encounter that bothered him. It was the feeling of being singled out, of being vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt in years. For someone who prided himself on self-reliance, this sense of unease was unsettling. Around mid-morning, Susan called again. Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the same mix of concern and determination she'd shown the night before. "Dad, I talked to Jack about what happened," she said, referring to her husband, Jack Mitchell. "He thinks we need to take this seriously." Harold paused, leaning against the kitchen counter. "What do you mean, take it seriously? You think I'm in danger?" "I don't know yet," Susan admitted. "But Jack has experience with cases like this. People pretending to be cops or authority figures to scam others. He wants to come over and talk to you about it." Hearing that Jack might get involved gave Harold some comfort. Though they didn't see each other often, Harold respected Jack deeply. A former Marine turned FBI field agent, Jack was sharp, capable, and always level-headed. If anyone could figure out what was going on, it was him. Still, Harold hated the idea of causing trouble for his family. "I don't want to bother him," Harold said gruffly. "It's probably nothing." "Dad, please," Susan urged. "This isn't about bothering anyone. It's about making sure you're safe. Just trust me on this, okay?" Reluctantly, Harold agreed. After hanging up, he spent the rest of the day trying to keep busy. He watered the garden, flipped through an old car magazine, and even attempted to bake cookies, a recipe Margaret used to make, but burned them halfway through. By late afternoon, Harold found himself sitting on the porch again, staring down the empty driveway. Every passing car made him glance up, wondering if it might be the fake cop returning, or worse, someone else. When Jack finally arrived the following morning, Harold greeted him warmly, but couldn't hide the tension in his posture. Dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt, Jack looked more like a friendly neighbor than a federal agent. Yet there was an air of quiet authority about him, a steadiness that put people at ease. "Hey, Harold," Jack said, shaking his hand firmly. "Susan told me everything. Let's sit down and go over it." Inside, Harold recounted the entire story once more, this time with Jack listening intently. Unlike Susan, Jack asked detailed questions about the man's appearance, his mannerisms, the specific wording of his questions. As Harold spoke, Jack jotted notes in a small notebook, nodding occasionally. When Harold mentioned the business card, Jack examined it closely, turning it over in his hands. "This is sloppy work," Jack muttered, pointing out inconsistencies in the design. "Whoever made this wanted it to look official, but they didn't take the time to get the details right. That tells me they're amateurs, or desperate." Jack's words sent a flicker of relief through Harold, but also a pang of worry. Amateurs could still be dangerous, especially if they were targeting elderly individuals. Sensing Harold's unease, Jack leaned forward, his tone reassuring. "We'll figure this out," he said. "I'll run the number through our databases and see if anything pops up. In the meantime, stay alert, but don't let this guy intimidate you. If he tries to contact you again, don't engage unless I'm here." Harold nodded, grateful for Jack's calm demeanor. For the first time since the visit, he felt like he had a plan, and someone on his side who knew what they were doing. Still, as Jack packed up his things and prepared to leave, Harold couldn't shake the lingering question. What exactly were they dealing with? And how far would this imposter go to get what he wanted? The next morning, Jack returned to Harold's house with a plan. He carried a laptop bag slung over his shoulder and wore the same calm, focused expression that had reassured Harold the day before. As they sat down at the kitchen table, Jack opened his laptop and began explaining what he'd uncovered so far. "I traced the phone number on the card," Jack said, typing swiftly. "It's a burner phone, cheap, untraceable, and bought under a fake name. That alone confirms this guy isn't legit." Harold frowned, gripping his coffee mug tightly. "So what does that mean?" Is he working alone, or is there more to it? Jack hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Based on the pattern of questions he asked you, I think he's part of a bigger operation. These kinds of scams usually target older people, folks who might be seen as easier targets. They'll try to intimidate them into giving up personal information or even money. Harold's jaw tightened. The idea of being singled out because of his age made his blood boil. But instead of letting anger take over, he nodded slowly, listening intently as Jack continued. To catch him, we need to set a trap, Jack explained. We'll make him think you have valuable information he wants. Then, when he comes back, we'll be ready. Harold raised an eyebrow, intrigued but wary. You want me to call them? Exactly, Jack replied. I'll help you craft the message so it sounds convincing without raising suspicion. We'll tell him you remembered something important about the burglaries, something only a real victim would know. Once he takes the bait, we'll coordinate with local law enforcement to handle the arrest. Harold leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The thought of confronting the fake cop again made his stomach churn, but he knew it was necessary. If this man was preying on others like him, stopping him wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about keeping the entire community safe. Over the next hour, Jack walked Harold through every step of the plan. They rehearsed what Harold would say during the call, making sure his tone sounded hesitant but cooperative. Jack also arranged for backup, contacting the local sheriff's department to ensure officers would be nearby during the meeting. Though Harold trusted Jack completely, the idea of going toe-to-toe with a con artist left him uneasy. Later that afternoon, Harold dialed the number on the business card, his heart pounding as the line rang. When the fake cop answered, Harold did his best to sound nervous but genuine. Officer Daniels, Harold stammered. This is Harold Thompson. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, and I remembered something. Could be important. There was a pause on the other end before the man responded, his voice smooth and confident. Of course, Mr. Thompson. I'm glad you called. What did you remember? Harold swallowed hard, sticking to the script Jack had helped him prepare. Well, I don't want to talk about it over the phone. Can we meet again? Maybe tomorrow morning. Another brief silence followed, but then the man agreed. Sure thing. Same place as before. Yes, Harold replied quickly. My driveway. Around 10 o'clock. After hanging up, Harold let out a shaky breath. Jack gave him a reassuring nod. Good job. You sold it perfectly. Now, here's what happens next. Jack spent the rest of the evening finalizing the details of the operation. He mapped out the layout of Harold's property, identifying spots where deputies could hide without being noticed. He also instructed Harold to act naturally until the meeting, avoiding anything that might tip off the imposter. By the time Jack left, Harold felt a mix of emotions: nervousness, determination, and a flicker of excitement. For years, he'd lived quietly, content to fade into the background of life. But now, for the first time in a long while, Harold felt like he was part of something bigger, a chance to stand up not just for himself, but for everyone else who might fall prey to this scam. As night fell, Harold double-checked the locks on his doors one last time. Tomorrow would bring answers, and hopefully justice. But for now, all he could do was wait. The morning of the planned confrontation dawned bright and clear, with the kind of crisp air that made everything feel sharp and alive. Harold woke up early, his nerves buzzing like static electricity. He shuffled into the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee, and stared out the window at the empty driveway. The vintage Chevy still sat there, untouched since the fake cop's last visit. Today, it felt less like a project and more like a silent witness to what was about to unfold. Jack arrived just after sunrise, dressed in plain clothes, but carrying the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. With him were two deputies from the local sheriff's department, both discreetly armed and ready to act if things went sideways. They parked their vehicles out of sight down the road, leaving only Jack's car visible near Harold's mailbox. Everything had been carefully arranged to look normal, to avoid tipping off the imposter before he walked right into their trap. "Ready for this?" Jack asked as he stepped inside, giving Harold a reassuring smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," Harold replied, though his voice betrayed a hint of unease. They reviewed the plan one last time. Harold would greet the fake cop casually, keeping him occupied while Jack and the deputies moved into position. If the man tried to leave or became aggressive, the officers would intervene immediately. It was simple, straightforward, and designed to minimize risk. Still, Harold couldn't shake the weight of anticipation pressing on his chest. At precisely 10 o'clock, the rumble of a car engine broke the quiet. Harold watched through the window as the same black sedan pulled into his driveway. His hands clenched instinctively, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was it, the moment they'd been preparing for. When the fake cop stepped out of the car, he looked just as polished and confident as before. His uniform seemed immaculate, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. As he approached the house, Harold opened the door and stepped onto the porch, squinting against the brightness. "Mr. Thompson," the man said with a practiced smile. "Good to see you again. What did you remember?" Harold gestured toward the chairs on the porch. "Why don't we sit down? I'll explain." As they settled into the creaky wooden seats, Harold launched into the story Jack had helped him rehearse, a vague tale about seeing unfamiliar cars driving slowly through the neighborhood late at night. The fake cop listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking follow-up questions. But beneath his polished demeanor, there was an edge of impatience, as if he were eager to get what he wanted and leave. Unbeknownst to the imposter, Jack and the deputies were already in position. Hidden behind bushes and trees, they observed the scene silently, radios crackling softly with updates. When the fake cop leaned forward slightly, reaching for something inside his jacket, Jack decided it was time to act. Stepping out from around the corner of the house, Jack strode forward with purpose. In one fluid motion, he flashed his FBI credentials and raised his voice loud enough to carry. "Stop right there. Federal agent. Don't move." The transformation in the fake cop was instantaneous. One moment, he was all charm and confidence. The next, panic flickered across his face. He bolted upright, clearly caught off guard, and tried to make a run for his car. But before he could take more than a few steps, the deputies emerged from their hiding spots, blocking his path. "Hands where we can see them," one of them commanded sharply. Trapped, the imposter froze, his bravado crumbling under the weight of reality. Within seconds, he was handcuffed and being led away, protesting weakly about some misunderstanding. Harold watched the entire scene unfold from the porch, his heart racing but his expression steady. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of relief wash over him, not just because the danger was over, but because justice had been served. As Jack joined him on the porch afterward, Harold let out a long breath. That was intense. Jack chuckled, clapping him lightly on the shoulder. "You handled yourself perfectly. Couldn't have done it better myself." Though the adrenaline was still coursing through his veins, Harold allowed himself a small smile. He might not have been a hero by nature, but today he'd played his part, and it felt good. With the fake cop securely in handcuffs and escorted to a patrol car, the tension in Harold's driveway began to ease. The deputies loaded the imposter into the backseat, his protests fading into muffled grumbles as the door slammed shut. Jack stood nearby, watching the scene with a mix of satisfaction and professional detachment. For him, this was just another day on the job, but for Harold, it felt like the resolution of something much bigger. As the patrol car drove off, Jack turned to Harold with a small, approving smile. "You did great out there," he said. "That took guts." Harold shrugged modestly, though there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. "I didn't do much. You and the deputies handled the hard part." "Don't sell yourself short," Jack replied firmly. "Without your cooperation, we wouldn't have caught him. This guy was slick, confident enough to fool people if they weren't paying attention. But you stayed sharp, and that made all the difference. The two men walked back toward the porch, where the morning sun warmed the wooden planks. Jack pulled out his phone and scrolled through updates from his team. It turned out the fake cop wasn't just some random con artist working alone. A quick search of the sit-in revealed a treasure trove of incriminating evidence: fake IDs, stolen credit cards, and a notebook filled with names, addresses, and notes about potential victims. Many of them were elderly individuals living alone, marked with details like rarely visited or savings account. "This is bad news," Jack muttered, showing Harold the notebook. "He's part of a network targeting vulnerable people. They probably case their victims first, gathering intel before moving in." Harold frowned, his earlier relief giving way to anger. "So I wasn't the only one." "No," Jack admitted. "But thanks to you, we can stop them from hurting anyone else. We'll trace these names and warn the other targets. And once we dig deeper into this guy's connections, we might be able to take down the whole operation." Jack went on to explain how scams like this often worked. The fake cops would pose as authority figures to gain trust, then use intimidation tactics to extract personal information or money. If their targets resisted, they'd escalate their threats, or worse. What made this particular scheme especially dangerous was its scale. Based on the evidence found in the car, Jack suspected the ring operated across multiple states, preying on dozens of unsuspecting victims. For Harold, hearing all this was both infuriating and sobering. He thought about the countless others who might have fallen for such tricks, their savings drained, their sense of security shattered. Yet at the same time, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. By standing up to the fake cop, he hadn't just protected himself. He'd helped expose a larger threat lurking in the shadows. By mid-morning, the deputies finished processing the scene and packed up their equipment. As they prepared to leave, one of them approached Harold with a respectful nod. "Thanks for your help, Mr. Thompson. Folks like you make our jobs easier." Harold chuckled softly, waving off the compliment. "Just doing my part." Once the law enforcement vehicles disappeared down the road, Harold and Jack sat together on the porch, enjoying the quiet aftermath. The air smelled fresh, tinged with the faint aroma of blooming flowers from the garden. For the first time in days, Harold felt truly at peace. The weight that had been pressing on his shoulders was gone, replaced by a deep gratitude. For Jack's expertise, for the deputy's swift action, and for the simple fact that he'd been able to fight back against someone trying to exploit him. "You know," Harold said after a long pause, "I used to think my life was boring. Nothing exciting ever happened around here. Turns out, maybe boring isn't so bad." Jack laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Sometimes boring is exactly what you want. But hey, when it gets interesting, you handle it like a pro." They shared a laugh, the sound mingling with the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Though the ordeal was over, Harold knew it would stay with him for a long time. Not as a memory of fear, but as a reminder of strength. Even in his later years, he had proven that standing up for what's right never goes out of style. In the weeks that followed, the investigation into the fake cop's operation grew wider and deeper. The evidence collected from his car and phone led authorities to uncover a sprawling criminal network spanning several states. Dozens of victims came forward, sharing eerily similar stories of encounters with men posing as police officers, utility workers, or even bank officials. Each victim had been targeted because of their age, isolation, or perceived vulnerability. Thanks to Harold's bravery in setting the trap, law enforcement was able to dismantle the group piece by piece, arresting key members and shutting down their operations. Harold became something of a local celebrity after news of the arrest spread. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate him, patting him on the back and calling him a hero. At first, Harold shrugged off the praise, insisting he'd only done what anyone else would have done. But deep down, he couldn't deny feeling a quiet sense of pride. For years, he'd lived a life defined by simplicity and routine, content to stay out of the spotlight. Now he realized that even someone like him, just an ordinary man in a small town, could make a difference when it mattered most. The story also brought Harold closer to his family. Susan called nearly every day to check in, her voice filled with relief and admiration. "Dad, I'm so proud of you," she said during one call. "You didn't let them push you around. That takes real courage." Jack, too, made sure to keep Harold updated on the progress of the case. He explained how the fake cop they'd caught was linked to at least 5 other scams across neighboring counties. Turns out this guy wasn't just targeting people for cash, Jack told Harold during one visit. They were using stolen identities to open credit accounts, take out loans, you name it. It's a mess, but we're cleaning it up. Hearing about the scale of the operation left Harold shaken, but also grateful. Grateful that he trusted his instincts and his family to handle the situation. Grateful that no one else would fall prey to these criminals. And grateful for the reminder that, despite his age, he still had value to offer the world. As spring turned to summer, Harold returned to his usual routines, tending to his garden, fixing up old cars, and sipping coffee on the porch while watching the sunrise. Life seemed quieter now, almost as if nothing had happened. But Harold knew better. Beneath the surface, things were different. He felt stronger, more confident, and more connected to those around him. The experience had taught him that being kind didn't mean letting others walk all over you, and that standing up for yourself wasn't just about protecting your own dignity, but safeguarding others as well. One afternoon, Harold received a letter in the mail. It was from the local sheriff's department, thanking him for his role in bringing down the scam ring. Enclosed was a certificate of appreciation, signed by the sheriff himself. Harold chuckled as he read it, shaking his head in disbelief. "Never thought I'd get an award for anything," he muttered to himself, pinning the certificate to the wall near his workbench. That evening, as Harold sat on the porch with a cup of tea, he reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the uncertainty, the adrenaline. It all seemed distant now, like a storm that had passed through and left clear skies behind. What remained was a renewed appreciation for life's simple joys, the warmth of the sun, the laughter of friends, and the knowledge that even in the face of danger, good people could come together to do the right thing. For Harold, the ordeal wasn't just an end, it was a beginning. A reminder that no matter how quiet or unassuming life might seem, there was always room for courage, connection, and purpose. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Harold smiled. He may not have asked for adventure, but he had faced it head-on and come out stronger on the other side.